Hello, everybody. I'm David Kirkpatrick. I'm a journalist, and I have a company called Techonomy Media, which is a business and technology synthesis media organization talking about technology's role in business and social progress. And we have a conference called Techonomy, which looks at those issues at a very macro scale, and several of you have attended it, happy to say. And we just had an event last week called Techonomy Detroit, looking at the role of technologized society in the U.S. economy and the revival of cities like Detroit and what it means long term. So that's pertinent to some of what we're going to be discussing here, which is a very broadly defined session on advances in digital technology, which by my sort of definition is kind of the same thing as saying advances. So we're going to be talking about advances because everything that happens in society today is affected by digital technology. But we're really going to be looking in specific, I think, at what's happening in business technology and then looking as sort of a little farther out than maybe most of us typically do at where some of the digital innovations that are underway now might begin to take us societally, culturally, from a business point of view. For the time being, I have two excellent panelists. We are expecting a third. And let me just quickly introduce them. Tom Layton, who's the CEO of Akamai and a co-founder there. And we'll get into what he does. And Akamai is a network technology company that basically quietly and efficiently directs an awful lot of the traffic of the internet without you ever knowing it, contracted by people like Facebook or Apple or any other big internet company to make their systems work more efficiently when their customers are all over the place, meaning literally all over the world. Carlos Dominguez here from Cisco. His title is Senior Vice President, but he sort of has a very broad mandate as a futurist, as a visionary. What are your other mandates, Carlos?
Innovation.
Innovation. That's a good mandate. So to innovate or to explain innovation or both?
Both.
Okay, good. Well, we'll apply you to certainly the latter here. So, you know, one of the things Carlos gave me in advance was a list of things that he thought would be pertinent to this discussion, which, just to spin your head a little bit, I'm just going to read the list. And I hope we'll get to as many of these as possible. But when you talk about advances in digital technology, the point I made earlier that there really is very little that one would necessarily leave out. Here's the list of 10. I'm sure he could have made it a list of 20 if he tried, that Carlos sent me that he thought would be pertinent to discuss here. Synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, wearable computers, the Internet of Everything, augmented reality, neurosciences, robotics, nanotech, 3D printing, then network and computing, just a little one at number 10 there. So maybe, Carlos, let me start with you. Let me ask you, you know, when you think of advances in digital technology writ large, you know, leave aside your list of 10 for a second. How big are the advances in digital technology we're seeing right now from the standpoint of us as individuals living in the present moment? How big of a deal is it? And how big of a deal is it to the conduct and the future of business? And just to overlay yet another thing on that, and we can get to these in you know, over time and as we have our hour, but a lot of the theme of this conference is the relation between the developing and the developed world. So, you know, how do advances in digital technology change that nexus?
Okay. I think you asked me like 5 questions.
And I'll ask them again if you don't get to them all the first time. Don't
I haven't
worry.
had enough coffee. So you know, the first thing is, I mean, if you really think about it, the world we're living today is, you know, radically different than, you know, 5, 10 years ago. And it doesn't cease to amaze me, you know, every time you pick up the paper, HP and Dell were dropped from the Dow Jones Industrial Average, 2 weeks ago. Today you're reading that RIM, you know, or BlackBerry, previously RIM, is getting bought out and privatized for $4.2 billion. Here's a company that had $20 billion of revenue and 90% market share in the enterprise, right? So, you know, you don't have to be too smart to notice that there's something afoot. And, the greatest challenge I think that, we face as executives and leaders in large corporations is that everything that we do in business has radically been accelerated. For example, movements that would occur over a 3-year period, we just saw our last quarter in Latin America happen in 90 days, where the business totally transformed. So how we approach business, how we monitor it, and what actions we take have to be radically different than the past, David. And as we, at the cause of all of this is digital technology, in particular connectivity. If you think about it, we're connected in a way that we've never been connected before. It's projected that by 2016, 92% of the world population will have access to some sort of mobile technology. I'm not saying everyone with super high speeds, but as we continue to connect, and not only connect, we're in a medium today. If you think of all the previous mediums with television, radio, newspaper, it was one directional, and each one had a different infrastructure. So now we're living in a world that we're not only connected, it's a common infrastructure that's bidirectional. So not only is the same infrastructure receiving data, but it's making us all contributors, producers, and it's changing, the whole game. So, incredible challenges in business, but, at the heart of it is really just humanity being adverse to adapting and changing at the speed in which we're facing.
Well, and when you talk about advances in digital technology, just to go back to the root of it, Moore's Law is really at the heart of how it's all happening so quickly. And just to summarize that, for those of you who aren't thinking about it all the time, the fundamental processing engines of bits, which are processors or chips that process data, continue to increase their capabilities at an exponential rate. And this was defined 30 years ago by Gordon Moore of Intel. Is why it's called Moore's Law. But the fact that it continues is really sort of at the heart of why digital technology is so rapidly altering everything, because the cost of processing a bit and applying some understanding and order to a bit is just dropping constantly. And so as the cost of processing data drops, our ability to do more with it increases. So with that sort of general thought, and just let me really daunt Tom with a invitation to talk as broadly as he wants, and to apply what's happening at Akamai in a big picture to how you see digital technology changing the landscape for business and for the planet.
Yeah, so in fact, the Moore's Law has gone even farther. It's not just that the CPUs can do more every year. There's a lot more CPUs. So today there's already 8 billion connected devices connected to the internet that are smart. That's more than the number of people. That'll probably be 50 billion by the end of the decade. And also the cost to transmit a bit of data between these devices is dropping exponentially. So you have 3 factors put together that just cause the explosion of the impact of digital technology. Really, every one of us, everything, it's called the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything or the hyper-connected world, everything is getting connected, not just your cell phone or your tablet or your home TV. Your automobiles today are connected. If you buy a new car, there's a computer in that car that's connected, and it controls 70 critical functions. And already people have discovered vulnerabilities in its software to the extent where somebody can make your airbag deploy while you're driving your car, and they don't even have to be in the same country to do it. Your bodies are being connected for medical purposes or in the military, so your biometric data goes into the cloud. Your doctor can respond immediately if something goes wrong. Even non-electric devices are being connected through QR codes. You can just scan the QR code, and if you're in a store, you can buy, what is on the piece of paper. So in fact, now you have the shopping walls where you don't even have to be in the store, and you can buy it just by scanning the QR code. Education, you talk about the emerging world, there's going to be billions of people who were never connected to anything now are going to be connected to the internet, and they're going to be able to, for example, complete a degree at MIT. Through the edX program and get a really high quality, not personal, but high quality educational experience. And I think that has tremendous potential. And then, of course, if you succeed in getting those masses educated, well, they're connected now through the internet. They can conduct business. What you'd see, some of that happening in India and China, that can happen throughout the third world. And I think we can't even begin to imagine the kinds of things that could happen, in the future now that everything gets connected.
Well, you're rising to the challenge healthily. So do you think the NSA can deploy my airbag if they want to as I'm driving down the highway?
Yes.
So presumably,
I don't think they would, but I think
they might
could.
under some circumstances, depending on who I was, right?
I shouldn't get quoted about the NSA here, but
are they a customer?
The technology exists, and researchers have demonstrated that capability. Now, there's no way in the world the NSA is going to deploy your airbag.
Not mine, but I could see them doing it to somebody.
I don't know. I don't think that's not in their charter, is my guess. However,
do they have limits to their charter?
I have no idea.
I didn't know they had limits to their charter.
I'm not an expert on the NSA, I got to tell you.
No, I'm not either, obviously.
By the way, David, they could take you out a lot easier just by zapping your pacemaker.
Yeah.
You don't even need to do.
Sure, yeah, thank you. There you go. Okay, back to you then, Carlos. By the way, there's a bunch of other people in the room who I know can contribute to this discussion, and I will require them to do that. So be prepared, Tom, John, Jody, anybody else who I recognize in the audience. But certainly the three of you I know have a lot of interesting things to add, and maybe about the NSA, but Jody in particular. But Internet of Things, which Cisco likes to talk about, the Internet of Everything, which is an equally valid phrase. It's a huge issue for Cisco as well as Akamai, as the way I like to talk about it is that intelligence is getting further and further distributed because, again, the cost of intelligent technology is going down so rapidly that we can put it not only in our eyeglasses, but probably ultimately into a cell in a petri dish when the ultimate exponential impacts begin to be felt. How big of a deal is that?
Well,
that's digital technology advancing into new areas in itself, right?
Well, David, it's going to change everything, right? So, we've connected humans. As we heard, there's 8 billion devices already connected. And the interesting thing is everything you connect will generate data. I've got a Nike Fuel Band on. I've got the Pebble watch on, but, everything generates some information.
Why do you have both of them?
Because they're totally different. This is just a wearable interface to control my iPhone, and this is more for my health monitoring. Everyone familiar with the Nike Fuel Band? It just monitors and tracks. What's really good about it is the gamification side. So what I do is I have two brothers that live in Florida, and I'm the youngest one, thank God, and we all compete on a weekly basis who has most activity, and whoever loses has to pay by sending us 2 bottles of wine to the 2 losers. So this is that silly little thing, wearing a band.
Weekly you do that?
Weekly, yes. Oh, we love wine. So, there's nothing wrong with that. But here's the interesting part. It actually modifies your behavior. And the goal that I've got is I have to hit 4,000 fuel points, which is fairly active. It's about 15,000 steps a day. And about 3 weeks ago,
in order not to send wine, you have to
but
15,000 steps a day is a lot of steps, particularly if you don't live in New York.
Well, I live in New York, so it's quite easy. But here's the point. I was laying in bed at 11:35 at night, and I happened to hit my band, and I was at 3,482 steps. And I look over, my wife's asleep, and I did what any other person would do, is I got out of bed, put my sneakers on, went for a run, right? And I hit my 4,000. And I would have never done that if it wasn't for the fact that something was monitoring me. There was a contest going on. We have gamified it, and, just for giggles. So we're going to be connected, but the more important thing about even the connections is this notion there's got to be not only a connection, but a process on how we gather it, and then the analytics to interpret it and turn it to wisdom and knowledge. And when it gets interesting, the way I kind of view the Internet of Things, it's happening in silos, which is how most technologies evolve. If anybody has a Nest thermostat, so here's a thermostat that's connected to the Internet, that's generating data. My Nike Fuel Band is generating data. If you've got a Philips Hue light bulb is connected to the Internet. It's an LED light bulb with 3 million colors, and each of them do their own thing. What it gets interesting is when you have a platform that converges them all, you can extract data, you can run processes through it and kind of change everything, and that's why it's so powerful. But it also opens up, to Tom's point very early on, is the security level of what's possible. One of the interesting things, there's a company out of Philadelphia that does these street lights that have a mesh network on the top. It's got biological sensors on it. It's got cameras. It's got LED panels. If I hacked into that, just a light post, I can say I've detected a biological agent, post it on one of the screens, tell everybody run this way, and the other side do the same, and I can create mass panic and maybe even kill people by just hacking into a light pole. So security becomes of utmost importance. So, with one way is it's going to really change and revolutionize everything, and on the other hand, I think it's going to introduce some, pretty interesting things we need to address.
Yeah, and that's true, at every level. Tom, you spend a lot of your time thinking about how businesses can more efficiently leverage the internet. In the description of this session, unbounded though it is, the first two phrases are cloud computing and the movement to the Internet of Things. How are those two things, cloud computing and Internet of Things, in specific, altering the conduct of business and the way companies think about their opportunities?
Yeah, IT enterprise business is changing dramatically. I think you look back 5 years ago, and that business at a high level involved the IT manager buying a device and running it behind his firewall on the WAN. And that was pretty much it. And that's totally disrupted now. First, you don't buy the device to run the application anymore. You're buying a cloud service. You don't own it. You don't operate it. It's you pay by the drink. And it's not behind your firewall. It's out in the internet. It's out in the cloud. And you can't put your hands on it if you're the IT manager. So that's a big shift, I think. So the way you buy and the way you operate it has changed. The same time you got the Internet of Everything, or the Internet of Things, and there's just a zillion devices. And your employees, the device they bring to work is different. It's their home device. It's the Droid or the iPhone. It's not the BlackBerry anymore that you were comfortable with in your enterprise infrastructure and that was secured. And so now the employee has a very insecure device that they're using, for your corporate applications that are sitting out on the internet. So it's just a huge disruption, I think, for the enterprise IT world.
Was that Coffin suggestion
Cough.
You had something to say? Or,
No, just cough.
Hey, Jody. I'm sorry, I'm going to do this right off the bat because we have, relatively small panel here. And is there a mic? Do we have a mic for the audience, or shall we just shout it out? You're a security expert, one of the most knowledgeable people I know about what's happening with security. And, I would love you to talk briefly, and feel free to identify yourself, about, what you see happening with, the digitization of society at the broad level and the security implications of that have been brought up already on the stage, and anything you want to say about it, I'm happy to hear.
Thanks. Well, so I'm Jody Westby. I'm CEO of Global Cyber Risk. I really am seeing the wireless technologies come to play where, and I predicted about 10 years ago that was going to be our next disruptive thing. Then you remember at Techonomy a couple years ago I talked about satellites. But today I'm really interested in laser technology combined with satellites and what that's going to do to enable people to bypass the traditional providers and potentially be able to bypass some of these government monopolies and create cheap communications for people all over the world.
Wait, now why lasers? Lasers you're throwing in there,
Because,
sort of throwing me for a loop
NASA's
there.
been looking at this, and they've spent this laser technology can directly hook to a satellite.
So it's going to be increasingly inexpensive for individuals to communicate with satellites?
You
Yeah.
don't have to go through all the towers and everything else. It's way
And that's a lot more
But you need line of
efficient.
sight, though.
Pardon?
You need a
You
line
need
of...
line of sight for that, don't you?
Yeah, but I mean, these things are going to evolve, and so I'm especially interested from Tom about your perspective because to me that could be powerfully disruptive.
Well, the satellite is owned by somebody, and it's probably owned by one of the big companies that maybe people are trying to get around. And it's a broadcast mechanism. So it's a little harder to do all the point-to-point communications through a small number of satellites. And of course, you do need to have the line of sight. A different technology, but is also related in spirit to what you're talking about is, grid-based technologies through the fabric of the mobile devices. The chipsets there are often equipped with the ability to communicate locally off the grid, well, off the ISP, if you will, but with other devices, and they could be connected into a cellular grid framework. It's hard to communicate long distance that way because you have the problem with if you cut the country in half, the people over here trying to talk to the people over here, you don't have the capacity to do that. I think at the end of the day, it probably is really hard to escape the big entities, namely the governments in a lot of countries and the major carriers globally, that they're here and are going to have a strong presence for a long time to come. Encryption, can be a defense there if you don't want people to, look at what you're doing, but you're probably still going to need, the fabric of the carrier really at scale.
Just to add on, I had responsibility, Jody, for the service provider industry for 7 years at Cisco. And I can tell you that no matter what they spend, it's never enough because we consume the bandwidth. Every time you put in a new device, it eats it up. I mean, interesting stat, 20 homes in 2010 consume more bandwidth than the entire internet of 2005. 1995, not 2005. So it kind of puts into context, no matter what you deliver, it's going to be consumed. So it's a big challenge for them, and especially as these devices get faster and smarter with more processing power, et cetera. So never enough, and it's big investment.
I think that's very useful, but I just see the continuing new models of connectivity as something that is really going to be dynamic, especially in developing countries, and it's going to introduce huge security issues because it's just so many new modes, so many different platforms, so many different devices, and so many vulnerabilities that it's going to become very unmanageable. The bad guys are winning now. It's going to be a bigger challenge.
You think the bad guys are winning now?
Oh, yeah, without a question.
Explain why you think that. That's a pretty strong
Because we
statement.
can't track and trace them and prosecute them, and there's no mechanism to deter crime. If we deter crime on the street by educating people, turn on your porch lights, lock your windows, don't do this, don't do that. We're not able to deter cybercrime because we can't catch these guys. Our legal frameworks are the biggest problem. It's not the technology. It takes months to go through a formal process of international cooperation. So if you can't, it's become the easiest crime and the most lucrative.
Well, you've brought in a couple of interesting themes. One, the whole globalization piece, and I know it is such a big part of the discussions here at this conference, how development will be altered as a result of all the things that are underway. And when you talk about bypassing, the governmental structures, it's interesting. First of all, what you said about, in which Tom I think disagrees with, the prospect of empowerment, political empowerment for people who live under less than generous governmental regimes, or less than inclusive government regimes, less than democratic ones. But
I don't disagree with that.
you don't? We just think lasers aren't going to be the answer for that, or you're like the carriers will still be in the picture, but people will still be able to bypass.
I think carriers will be in the picture, but the internet has certainly, enabled revolutions, in the communication of the people. So I wouldn't go that far to say that you're not going to be able to have communications. In fact, the communications are happening, and that's what enables groups to organize, and I think has, fostered political change, even though it may have come across traditional carriers to do it.
The point, the follow-on, we talked about Moore's Law, which is around processing. You also have Metcalfe's Law, which is about network effect. So, if you build new networks and no one's on it, there's no power. The power increases with the number of end nodes, right, or the number of users.
Well, another interesting thing that happened in a lot of these revolutionary contexts, and particularly in Iran during the Green Revolution, is that, they saw Facebook and Twitter and other systems being used to organize dissent. But because the mullahs and their families were also using these same systems, they didn't want to turn them off. So that's the problem. Everybody is reliant on all these systems, and it makes which I don't know. I guess there's so many directions we can go here, but Maybe, Carlos, let me ask you, how optimistic are you that digital technological advances writ large are going to significantly level the economic playing field globally as the dispersal of digital technology becomes broader and broader?
You know, that's a really difficult question, but I do have a point of view, and this is my view, is that we all tend to look at the things we've got, like an iPhone or an Android, and the power and LTE and all these things that are high speed, and we kind of by assumption think that as we move towards a developing nation and somewhere in Africa that has nothing, that this is where they're going to start, and they're not. Right, and what I've discovered as I've gone through Africa and other places is that a very simple 2G phone that has texting capability for a fisherman coming in to know which farm, what market to go to is a difference of 20% for them, right? Or in the case of women, for safety, and stuff, the phone makes all the difference in the world. So, my notion is it's connectivity, and back to Moore's Law, as you keep introducing new processors, one generation, 2 or 3 generations below, those prices drop exponentially, and thus they become available. So, there's this cascading effect. And then the other thing, too, is, well, isn't there now a bigger digital gap between developed nations and developing nations? And I say, and Tom can probably answer this question more than I can, but if you think of the amount of bandwidth that we're consuming here in the U.S. and the requirements for big bandwidth, it's really video. And do they need video? I don't think it's a necessity based on where they are. So although the bandwidth, the devices, the processing powers may be different, I think the functions and the quality of life are being improved by digital technology exponentially.
So you see more convergence than at the macro scale, the video being a little bit of a red herring. So in other words, the capabilities are getting more similar between us and the traditionally impoverished parts of the world.
I think connecting people and giving them the ability to access knowledge is really what I think the mankind and human factor that really drives things.
Yeah.
I think video is a luxury that nice to have, but not mandatory.
I'll throw another one in that I find very interesting when you think about what's going to change life in the developing poorer parts of the planet, and that's money. If historically in villages where you have very little security, people literally carried their money on them all the time. That because they didn't have a lot, but what they had, they carried with them, and that meant they could easily be robbed. But now that you can store value on your smartphone, your cell phone, if your 2G dumb phone, that is a massive game changer for security, economic progress, and once you can actually be sure you're not going to have your money stolen. Of course, you got to keep your phone from being stolen, I suppose, but even that you probably have some degree of protecting your money, which is stored by your carrier or whatever in some cloud.
You got to protect your cow in many places. It's not even carrying your money around. All your life
You've got to
savings are in a
protect your
cow.
cow, exactly. That your wealth is in your physical assets. But I think that the ability to have wealth that is in financial form, that's manifested in your phone, becomes a really major tool for economic progress. And again, it's a digital development. I see you nodding, John, over there. What did you nod about? John?
Well, I agree. I think that the phone is going to be a vehicle.
Get the mic. It's coming to you.
He doesn't need a mic.
No, but it's good to have for the video.
John.
Okay, right. No, I agree. That what we're seeing is the phone as a platform is doing a lot of innovation development in countries. And what would cost $300 an Android phone, you can now get the same functionality for $35 now.
In an Android phone, or just a cheaper Android
One
phone.
Android variant.
Yeah.
So you get that kind of functionality. At the same time, we look at how do you create new kinds of digital institutions on that platform that are tamper-proof, so in the sense that money goes where it's supposed to go. And then for NGOs, you can see what the program achieve what it's supposed to achieve. There's a whole new kind of infrastructure that can be created, I think, on a mobile platform that combines banking and mobile in a way that's difficult to do in the more developed world. But one of the points that I wanted to respond to was something earlier about this issue bleeding over into security and authorization and cybercrime. In that, when we talk about the Internet of Things, I mean, typically when we think about cybercrime and cybersecurity, we think about computers, but in fact, everything's being connected. We generate petabytes of data. And so the whole notion of being able to have security in your classic notion of authorization, have some authority, be the central authority for creating a credential, starts to blow apart. And I think, I've written earlier about this, that a lot of the innovation is going to come in sort of how do you have distributed credentialing that manages risk in a dynamic way, and it's at the edge of the organization rather than centralized organization. And that changes institutions profoundly. It changes governments, it changes banks, it changes who's the authority for who you are, who absorbs the risk, who manages the risk, how do we calculate the risk. All of those things I think we've done in a very sort of top-down, centralized way, and it has to be distributed. You cannot do it.
So you're talking about identity, defining you as a unique individual, and your ability to control that yourself as opposed to being reliant on a centralized government.
Right. Not only that, and then not only who you are, but then what rights or privileges you have, how long you have those rights, who gives them to them, who revokes them. Traditionally, that's been a government function. But I think that's going to be more distributed because you just can't keep it. A government can't do that. So they're going to have new kind of security models and much more distributed.
John, that's really, I mean, you've been at the leading edge of a lot of this kind of thinking for a long time. I wrote a book about identity, 6 years ago. When you hear Jody say the bad guys are winning, does that resonate with you, or how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I think from a certain perspective, I can see that people are getting away with a lot of stuff they shouldn't get away with. And there isn't that they're exploiting really gaps or holes in the security system, the legal system. On the other hand, I think you're creating enormous values being created as well. And the question is, you're always going to have theft and fraud of some kind. What's the magnitude of it? Yes, it could be very extreme. I'm not of that emphasis. It isn't something I focus on. Because I think in going forward, I think you can get to security. I think you can authenticate people networks. I think you know where they come from. I think you're going to have interoperable distributed private networks of kinds where people are going to make agreements as to how to absorb certain kinds of risks, so to be re-identified. So I think some of these issues are going to be dealt with. And because what happened with the web, it was built without authentication. So oops, we forgot something, right? And that's why you get passwords into a very sort of ad hoc process. But I think we're going to evolve into something that's more principled. And that'll be one of the key innovations of the future. And it'll be innovation in governance, and a new way of how it's self-governance at the edge.
If I can just jump in on what John was talking about, it's fascinating. We started off with everything connected, everything, businesses, I was commenting how difficult it is. And, if you think about the change that we've experienced in the last 5, 10, 15 years, it's crazy. And the most difficult things for us to really determine is technology supersedes laws and common sense in many ways. I mean, Campos, who has a pacemaker, decided that he wanted his data to analyze it, and the pacemaker company says, no, it's my data. And they're in court now trying to figure out, it's his heart.
Who is this guy?
Campos, a gentleman who's suing a pacemaker company that he has a pacemaker. He wants the data to really analyze, and the company's going, no, we own the data, not you, of his own heart, right? So but it's a classic example. The problem that we have in these issues is that we've taken things that we had 10, 15 years to dialogue and discuss and approach, and we've compressed it now because the speed in which things are coming at us is daunting, right? So how not only do we do identity, but how do we govern? How do we address these issues, before they happen? I was at a conference with the Singularity University team talking about synthetic biology, and they scared the daylights out of me. I can take a DNA of something, get it digitized, put it on my computer, manipulate it, send it back out and reprint it. Just because I can do it, should we be doing it? Should I be determining when I have a child not only the sex, but the height, the intelligence, everything about that child before? I mean, we can start constructing that. So there's a lot of ethical issues.
We're not quite there yet, but,
well, but
that's something worth
getting close.
imagining.
Or how long should we live? I mean, they've uncovered the proteins on what triggers aging.
I'm glad you're bringing that stuff up, though, because, I mean, if we want to have a big picture discussion of the, implications of digital progress, those are legitimate things to enter in, that we are acquiring more knowledge and the capability of control in more and more arenas. I mean, John's talking about identity, but when you talk about controlling your own, your progeny's DNA, that's a whole nother level that is not at all crazy to contemplate. I mean, I think those are future spin thoughts. That's not possible now to 3D print your progeny, right?
It's getting close. I mean,
You
it
still
really
have the
is.
mic? How did you get that? Okay.
We're not going to take it away from him.
No, it's still close. I mean, so the idea of 3D printing of the tissue is being done, right? So you can,
Yeah.
you get an organ.
3D printing of simple
So
tissue
you
is being done,
actually-
yeah.
So you can, Star Trek and have instead of teleport yourself, I mean, you can have a fabricator. You could teleport your DNA to some fabricator who can fabricate a part of your flesh. I mean, this is stuff you want to do.
Well,
But it's the beginning,
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you another sort of element of that. I had breakfast with a guy from Autodesk, who's a futurist at Autodesk, who's in town for a bunch of maker movement kinds of things, and they'd like to talk about 4D printing, and for them, the fourth dimension is self-assembly. So, in other words, he believes that it's not at all inconceivable, and I made a brief reference to this throwaway in early part of this discussion, that organic biological systems will begin to self-construct in the relatively near future, and they will be controllable to some degree because of the Internet of Everything, because not only will they be self-constructing, but they will be monitored by connectivity that is down to the level of potentially the cell. This is all hypothetical, but not crazy. So it's just throwing out there the kind of things that we may begin to see. They were saying, that they think in general products will begin to self-assemble, and the task of companies increasingly will be to keep up with the way that the products that they supposedly produce and distribute are themselves self-evolving. I mean, and this is the kind of world we're entering into that is so unpredictable. And I think, honestly, in my opinion, when people talk about digital technology and the advances that are capable, they generally are way underappreciating the scope of transformative evolution that we are. Say more, Carlos.
So here's the challenge, right? This is a very well-informed, very intelligent audience, right? And I'm sure some of these things they may not even be familiar with. So how do we take the average human being or American who has no idea about any of these things that are going on, and how do we really make the right decisions in an informed way where we're inclusive, not exclusive, in some of these decisions, because they're really very big things. They're not tiny.
These are social implications. This was a big topic of Techonomy Detroit because we actually made the theme this year education. And you say, oh, education because you need people to have the skills to get the jobs, whatever they're going to be, if they do exist. But it's really not just the skills to get the jobs. It's the skills and the capability of thinking to be an informed citizen in a highly evolved society where the context of society is evolving so much more rapidly than the capabilities of the citizens to live within it. And I think that's kind of scary. Who has any thoughts about that? Stefan, you're over there blackberrying. Somebody else who I recognize and am capable of ambushing. John, do you still have the mic there?
No.
And any observations you have, Stefan, I'd be curious to hear.
Laid out a daunting picture, but I think...
Talk quickly about what you do. I mean, you're sort of doing a bunch of interesting things.
Well, I'm senior advisor at the Market Foundation, which is a foundation focusing on IT and how to address critical public needs. And then I'm also co-founder of a new center, which is the Governance Laboratory, which looks at how you can use new technologies and advances in science to change how we govern society and basically solve problems. And so there are multiple ways, depending which hat I wear, to respond, I guess. But I think one critical element with regard to the advances of technology is exactly what is going to be the future of all of future labor force that will deal with most of those advances to a certain extent. Because as we see next door, there's a whole debate about the future of the economy, and as we see that technology is actually the
Tom, you got any thoughts on what's going to happen to the future of work in a digitized economy?
Yeah, you can work at home. You don't have to come into the office. You know, you asked before, does this level the playing field with globalization? I think it does. I think you already see that. You know, just in the last several years, the relative salary for an employee in Bangalore doing technology related or enabled by technology to, you know, the United States went from 5 to 1 to 3 to 1. And I think that's enabled because of the technology. You have the education as possible, and then you have the communication as possible to actually do the work, transmit the work product back digitally, because increasingly the work product is digitized, so you can get it back and forth quickly. So I think just, you know, you have a better workforce, more flexible, and more global as a result of the technology.
You know something, what you just said, we'll get to you in 1 second, but one of the things you just said, Stefan, reminds me, you know, I spend my time talking to the leaders of the technology industry generally. We have this session in the other room on the future of the economy. It's amazing to me how seldom people in tech ever talk about the economy per se. They couldn't give a whatever in general, because they, and typically I think they presume that there is a huge kind of realm of economic activity that is being disregarded, ignored, overlooked, and that a lot of the presumptions of the conventional economic analysis have been so, you know, sort of obsessed with are really increasingly irrelevant. I mean, I personally believe that what used to be called the underground economy, you know, the off-the-books, non-tax paying portion, is way bigger than the Fed or economic analysis typically is capable currently of recognizing, and that the measures that are used as inputs for economic progress measurement are hopelessly inadequate. And then I mean, Techonomy 2 years ago, we were talking about, you know, all the different things the Fed could be using that it doesn't use to really figure out what's really happening with the economy. You know, there's you know, the elementary examples like Salesforce.com, you know, data, or, you know, I think they do use ADP, for example, a little bit. But, you know, there's, you know, what about, how do they factor in, you know, Etsy and eBay sales into the, you know, Fed's economic analysis? I just think we're in a new world that is not being recognized by the old world. So.
You know, one of the interesting, just to play off a little bit of it, that, you know, I get to deal with a lot of very senior executives like you do, and it's fascinating to me more and more the executives at the top of the organization, I believe, and this is my opinion only, are out of sync with our new world, because things have moved so fast. And
you don't mean Cisco, you mean the customers of Cisco.
Yeah. Customers of Cisco, yeah. No, I don't mean Cisco. But you know what? We too need to move a lot faster.
Right,
I mean, but it's really interesting though, and you know, here are really intelligent people that have a ton of experience, and they're starting to see issues and problems that resemble something that they've seen in the past. Thus, they think they have the answer. Yet, it's really not when you really do it at a 60-foot level. It's really a totally different story. And you're seeing, that's why you're seeing companies like BlackBerry and HP and Dell and others that have just missed huge markets. So one of the really important things that I tell a lot of the senior people...
All three theoretically technology companies,
yeah, because
which is
it's
especially interesting.
Well, yeah. Because it's shifted so fast. I mean, you know, think of where we've gone, you know, to tablets, and I mean, the devices we're carrying around. I mean, it's a totally different world from what, you know, for example, Dell did just a few years ago. But the biggest challenge is really understanding some of the fundamental trends that are going on and which ones are affecting your business. For example, 3D printing. If I was FedEx or UPS, I'd be saying, okay, if people start printing stuff locally, what does that mean, right? So if it's 12 by 12 and plastic, somebody will print it in their home. If it's bigger than that and some other material, it might go out of Staples. If it's bigger than 2 feet and, you know, titanium and other, maybe we need to put a center in. But, you know, it has huge implications.
No, FedEx Kinko's is thinking about that.
Yeah,
I think they've got some 3D printing in some of their stores now.
Or
actually.
one fine day, if you're in the hospitality business, right? You know, the whole thing is, you know, we have rooms. Well, you know, if you can take your home that's not being occupied and say I want to rent it out on a platform like One Fine Stay or some of the other ones that exist out there.
You mean Airbnb?
Airbnb or some of the other ones. I mean, that changes the whole economies of how things are done. And how do you play in that business?
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to Louise, but this idea of efficiency being applied across the board because of the ability to measure and connect is so economically altering. The sharing and the crowdsourcing economy being the two fundamental manifestations of that. Louise.
Hi, David.
Good to hear you and to have you there in the front row.
So after hearing you and after I did the opening speech, I guess yesterday, what's left for the human being? And how do we train the human being for tomorrow? Our education is not adapt to that. We need to be more creative, and we need to basically educate the students to put things in context and in an integration manner. Why is Apple so successful? First, it's because they were sensitive to design, and they integrated it in a simple manner. You have your phone, you have your computer, you download everything. BlackBerry was not, they didn't do that, so they missed the boat. So the question is, the computer is going to do a lot. So that's the robot.
Mm-hmm.
What's left for us? So, and do we have the mind prepared to deal with that? And I think that's the real huge issue that we have in front of us. So that's why the summit is called Creative Summit, because we have to go back into the brain and see what added value we're actually going to add in the process.
Sure.
So, because the rest, even working from home, what are you going to do from home that the computer's not going to do?
I'm glad you said that. And Tom, prepare to say something, whatever. I'm going to make you say something in a minute. But, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about that's very pertinent, and I was happy to see the way you've structured this, creativity and the cultural side is important. But, I think a lot also about values and social sort of attitudes, and that, there's all this rhetoric about STEM, right? Education, blah, blah, we need more science, technology, engineering, and math, blah, 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 blah. But interestingly, China has a lot of that, way more than we do, and they do not have a comparably creative technology sector, much as they are making great progress in that arena, and we could talk about their progress, which is real, but it is not, it's mostly imitative, even still, for the most part. And I'm rereading a book that I really recommend to everybody. It's got a terrible title by John Markoff called What the Dormouse Said. It's something like The Roots of the Personal Computer Industry and the Counterculture. And the thing that book really says to me is, it really basically makes the point that, interestingly, the East Coast of the United States had all the makings of the PC revolution. They had Digital Equipment Corporation and IBM and Xerox, et cetera. But the PC emerged in Silicon Valley. Why? Because a bunch of hippies had a different view of human society that they manifested in their innovations. It was not that they were a bunch of engineers. There were engineers all over the place. It was that there were a bunch of engineers that had a different view of human society that they wanted to manifest in their innovations. And that is what led to the PC and then the Internet. I mean, the Internet had its government component too, but if you look, this is something that I have been interested in for a long time. I wrote a book about Facebook because I see it as a manifestation of the same set of trends. And another case where a technologist who had a specific set of values about communication and that weren't about picking up chicks to have sex, even though people say it was much more about, creating networks of like-minded people who in the real world, who you want to understand better. That's what Zuckerberg was motivated to enhance. Those kinds of motivations we need to find a way of spreading more broadly in society. In other words, when it comes to the education piece, we can't just educate people in basic stuff. We have to educate them in the deepest workings of culture so that they can think clearly enough to continue having a new vision of where society ought to go and therefore invent it. So that's you want to respond to that, Tom?
I can't respond to that.
Well, respond to anything, but
So I'll respond to one point that came up several times this morning, and then I want to raise another question that in some sense might take us to a different level. The first thing to respond to is the question that both Stefan and Louise raised about sort of what's going to happen with technology destroying jobs. Maybe I shouldn't even say this because Eric Brynjolfsson, one of the people who's kind of framed this question, is a student of mine. I'm getting kind of bored of that question. I think this is a question we've heard many, many times over the last few centuries. The Luddites started talking about this several hundred years ago with the weaving or the fabric mills in England. I think it's happened over and over and over again in our kind of economic history that technologies have destroyed some jobs. And some people never recovered the kind of level of prosperity that they had before that happened. But over and over and over again, in the history of technology and the history of our economy, new jobs have been created that more than made up for the jobs that had been lost. So I haven't heard anyone give an argument in principle even why we shouldn't expect that to happen this time.
Okay, somebody's hand wants to make an argument on that. Pass the mic to him.
Okay, and then can I come back and make my other point later?
Yes, you can, yes. But
Okay.
let's keep a dialogue going on that, and Stefan might have a comment.
Yeah, I think you can make that argument, and just sort of ad hoc argument that you're saying, oh, well, it's always happened in the past, but that new jobs have been created. And it's really not about prosperity, because the wealth and affluence that's being created very inexpensively by this is extraordinary. But if you look at other sectors, like what has happened with farming, agriculture, what has happened with industry, and now what's happening with a lot of things that are associated with information handling, essentially, that there is a larger and larger amount of human activity that can be replicated quite comfortably and effectively in a computational realm. And so there is a large, when we're talking about creativity, yes, that's a very narrow sector of society, and that multiplies value and concentrates wealth. But there are many, many people that, frankly, we look at it and it's hard to see exactly what they can accomplish that's competitive and it is going to be of value in that new realm that's being created. So I think it's not a boring, simple question.
Identify yourself, please.
Greg Stock. I'm the CEO of Signum Biosciences, and I'm active in the biotech arena at UCLA as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that the issue is that there's more machine doing more things than in the past. And that we're going to demand out of the human being much more. And if you give flat news on a newspaper, that's just not good enough. That's why they're disappearing. So you need to integrate information and do a multidisciplinary approach of education. You can't look at environment and then not look at technology or politics or the science. Everything is integrated. So we need to teach the children how to think in a way where we relate things and link the dots. That's not happening in many schools today, and we have to take it to the next level. And who to say that the computer is not going to do that? So the question is, what is going to be the computer of tomorrow, and what is left for us? And how do we train our children in schools and ourselves to be more creative and think out of the box? Because the rest is going to be a commodity.
So the difference is Tom is confident there will be something left for us, and some people are not. But no, did you want to say something? Or you're just passing the mic to Tom?
Give 5 examples of jobs that doesn't require a college degree and is not self-employed, low wages, that is going to be emerging in the next 5 years as a result of working at home and having 3D printers. Can you give some examples?
So I think the question is one of creativity and imagination. If we were sitting here in the year 1900 and we were talking about new farm machinery that was going to be destroying farm jobs, we would have said, what in the world are all these people going to do? Because the vast majority, I think 80 or 90% of the US population lived and worked on farms in 1900. What we couldn't really have imagined very well then was the vast amount of the population that would someday be employed in manufacturing and eventually services. Even if we were having this conversation in 1950 or 60, we wouldn't have been able to imagine the huge numbers of new jobs that have been created basically as a result of information technology. If somebody said, my son is going to grow up to be a database administrator or a blogger or a website designer, we wouldn't have had any idea what it meant. We couldn't have imagined all the jobs that were created, and I think sitting here today, it's not easy for us to imagine the new jobs that will be created.
I'm glad we've got this issue on the table, but let's keep bringing another. We got only 2 more minutes.
Okay, Howard Gardner here. What I think was going on between Louise and David really has to do with the question of what will the word us mean in the future? Because if we really can change human beings in very fundamental ways, then the question is, will the different cultures and traditions be willing to accept that? And I think there are going to be huge differences with the United States very far in one side, and the kind of conflicts which we used to think of as being political or economic are going to be submerged in views of what human beings are and can't be anymore. And I don't think we've really begun to confront that yet. But there are 7 or 8 billion of us, and we're not all going to agree. Fine, let's have our child be determined by the genetics which we can anticipate.
But you're presuming that the U.S. is more adaptive and will be better able to surf that wave than many other places?
I think so. I mean, that's not a value judgment. I think it's just a story. And as you were implying, the West Coast more than the East Coast. But I'm thinking of massive continents and massive religious groups who have been passing on very different concepts of human nature for long periods of time.
It is hard not to think when you say that of these recent massacres in northern Pakistan and in Kenya. People who just basically haven't gotten into the modern world and are saying, if you're not going to stick in the past like me, I'm going to kill you. And how broad that tendency becomes is kind of a frightening thing to contemplate, because we're moving faster and faster out of the world that they choose to live in. And yet they are like really resolute about sticking back there, and that sort of medieval modern juxtaposition is getting more and more uncomfortable and scary and disastrous.
And the speed that all you're talking about is very germane, because print changed human life, but it changed it over hundreds of years. And many of us, all the changes we're talking about took place just in our lifetime, even in the last 30 years. That's what I think is going to be very difficult to absorb.
Yeah, please, let's get 2 more voices in before we wrap, since can we get the mic over here real fast? I know we have to wrap up, but we got started a little late anyway. Identify yourself, please.
Hi, my name's Dana Cooper, and I'm from Bermuda, and I came up for this summit. And I am a designer. I'm a print designer. And it's so interesting listening to everybody, because I think for me in my business, it's about efficiency and getting to the consumer what they want, like as quickly as possible, in the best quality. And we have, there's a lot of, integrity in our work. We try to provide a high quality product, but we were producing in China, we were producing in India, and actually what it came down to is now we're producing in New York because we just want to walk down the street and be able to check our product. I think, and everything I do is digital. I start with an idea, I sketch it out, and I get the idea, and then it goes into the digital form. It gets scanned and created again digitally, and then it keeps getting converted to its final stage where it gets produced. And I think it's about efficiency and getting the information out there as quickly as possible, but it's trying to meet the needs of the consumer, whether the consumer is a shopper or a person in a nursing home who doesn't know how to access the information. Anyway.
I think we do have to wrap, right? Or Carlos?
I just want to comment. These dialogues happen often, and my personal view of technology, there's a pro and con. There's the yin and the yang. The question I always kind of pose is I believe, my belief is that I feel blessed to live in the moment in time that we're living, where it is our choice to be able to solve some of the world's greatest issues. And it's really an opportunity that we have. And there's nothing perfect, but if you reflect upon what's available, I mean, people have power unlike ever before. We're connected in ways that we could never imagine. Knowledge is democratized, right? A night doesn't go by that I argue with my kids and they're on the phone and we find out who's right instantly, right? Once you Google it. So we're living in a world where we have access to all of these things, and I think it's absolutely incredible. And yet, so many of the people that I talk to are not even leveraging the things that are available. So my ask of all of you is we're really moving very, very fast. I think we're very uncomfortable with the speed in which things are changing. But you got to participate. You can't be on the sidelines, and I think these dialogues are very critical in order to reach the right, outcome.
Nice way to summarize, and obviously the digital things are changing fast, the social consequences are changing quickly, so there's a lot to discuss, and thank you for the context and the opportunity to do it. Please.